All right. Welcome, Jeffrey Shaw, to the Self-Employment Success Podcast. I'm excited to have you here today.
I'm glad to be here with you, Leland. Thank you.
For those listening, Jeffrey Shaw is the king of self-employment, I would say. He has his Self-Employed Life podcast. He actually wrote a book called The Self-Employed Life, and he has done a lot of work around business, but also what does it mean to be self-employed and how that's different than being a small business owner or being an entrepreneur. And there are differences there. So I'm really excited to get to have him on the podcast today, have you on the podcast, Jeffrey. So go ahead, and I want to give you the floor to tell the listeners about yourself, who you are, and your story.
Yeah. Well, my entire story is about being self-employed. I've actually never had a traditional job. I've never received a paycheck from anybody. So this is it. This is all I've known. And quite honestly, I didn't realize, Leland, that was even remotely unique until I was at a dinner party in Toronto a few years ago, and that topic came up. And I'm a professional speaker, and I was at a table with other speakers, and they're like, "Do you tell that story on stage?" I'm like, "No, why? Is that unusual?" They're like, "Yeah, it's unusual that you've never had a job. But that's part of the journey, I think, of being self-employed, is that we're just doing the thing, right? I mean, we're just doing the thing day in and day out, and sometimes aren't even aware, of what it takes. And like I said, we're just doing the thing. So my story is, I literally started out being self-employed at 14 years old when I had a pivotal conversation with my father, which went something like him saying, "No one's going to care about your life as much as you do."
Mm.
And I really get the message of what he said, and it's proved true in a lot of ways. But at the time, as a 14-year-old kid, I was like, damn, I think that includes my father. Like, I don't think he's going to care about my life as much as I do. So it had a profound effect on me that I felt like in that moment, and I remember the moment exactly. I was literally sitting at a breakfast counter at a Denny's. For those of you who remember Denny's restaurants, one of the few, my father's a man of very few words, and I recall this being one of like 3 conversations I had with him. He passed when I was 20, so I didn't have a lot of years with him. And I think in an instant, I made a decision that this thing called life was up to me, that
Mm.
no one was going to step in to save me. No one was going to care about my life as much as I do. And that I didn't see a lot of other choices. I was growing up in a small country community. There was never any conversation about higher education. I had 2 older brothers that went right into construction after high school. One brother who didn't complete high school. I was kind of the intellect of the family and the deep thinker, but there didn't seem to be any path for that. I was the unusual one.
Mm.
I was the kid that was reading self-help books from time I was 10 years old, and I'd save my allowance and hide them because my family would have thought I was weird if they knew I was reading books by Wayne Dwyer. So I literally think at a moment I said, I'm going to take this bull by the horns and figure it out. And that to me is what being self-employed looks like. So at 14 years old, I struck a deal with a local farmer who had chickens and eggs. And that seemed like something I could sell on Saturdays because everybody needs eggs for Sunday morning breakfast. So
Mm.
I struck a deal with him. I would buy a dozen of eggs for 25 cents. He supplied the cardboard cartons, and I went to the farm on Thursdays, and I sat there and put the eggs in all the cardboard cartons and went door to door on Saturdays and selling eggs. And door to door included driving my mother's Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme, which was an enormous of a car, to a 14-year-old. I was 2 years too young to have a driver's license.
I was about to say, like,
No, it was completely illegal. But again, we do what we have to do when we're self-employed, and it was the country. Nobody was going to care.
yeah.
So yeah, I did. I mean, I drove all around town as a 14-year-old, barely seeing over the steering wheel, and I sold eggs. And my mom owned a beauty parlor, so I would drop off cartons of eggs to her customers on Saturdays. And there you go. I did that for a number of years, and then by 20, I was off in photography school, trying to figure out if there was a pathway to making a career as a photographer, because it was the one talent I felt I had. I'd won a number of awards in high school. I just didn't know what to make of this talent.
Mm.
And then while in photography school, I found that I really liked the intimacy of photographing people and doing portraits, despite the fact I was very shy. But I enjoyed the intimacy. I don't like crowds. I don't like big groups of people, but I love to get to know one person or a family of
Mm.
5 or 6. And I loved it. And long story short, from the age 20, I started my photography business. And by my late 20s, I had a phenomenally successful portrait photography business for very affluent families. Now,
Mm.
the crazy thing is, I'm this kid that grew up in farmland, lower middle class upbringing, and I ended up being the go-to photographer for the most affluent families in the United States. Obviously, there's a lot of steps on how that happened, but
I'm
it
sure
also
that's a whole podcast in and of itself.
oh, it's a whole book. My first book, Lingo, it's my book Lingo is a brand messaging book. It's the
Mm.
strategy of speaking the lingo of your ideal customers, regardless of what market you want to reach. But it's predicated on that story. Like that's how I did it basically. Like I figured out what is the lingo of affluent families. And I mention, because I always do, because I think it's the polite thing to do, is I didn't pursue an affluent market because I thought the roads were paved in gold or that they had a lot of money. I became aware a few years into my photography business, which was failing in my hometown. I became aware that I needed people with a discretionary income to appreciate my work, because it was all based on long-term thinking.
Mm.
People invest in large portions of their home for their future, for their children.
Mm.
And the only people that can afford to do that are people with discretionary income. Right. So I came to that awareness, but I then had to figure out, how do I speak their lingo? How do I break into that market? And that's ultimately what I unpacked. And then that led me to, I actually just a few weeks ago did my very last photography portrait session. I officially retired from photography
Really?
just about 3 weeks ago.
Wow.
Um,
Congratulations.
Thank you. Over the past 15, 16 years, I've done a lot less. I mean, it's been a part-time business, whereas I've been building my coaching practice and writing books and launching the Self-Employed Business Institute. And so I've been doing all things around self-employed for the past 16 years, doing less photography, but hanging on to those last few clients until I felt really complete. So I'm officially, a former photographer, you could say.
Mm.
And that leads me to what I'm doing today, which is the founder of the Self-Employed Business Institute, writing books for self-employed business owners, the Self-Employed Life podcast, and really hopefully being an advocate for self-employed people, which is what I think
Mm.
is necessary. I think, as I often say on stages, that we're an unconventional business in a very conventional world. And
Mm.
it's not that your industry is unconventional, but by means of being self-employed, you're unconventional. Like the
Mhm.
world around us doesn't do things. The world of business around us doesn't do things the way we need to do them to be successful.
Mm. That's really profound. I haven't thought about that, but you're right. Like everything in our society is geared towards
It's a trend.
traditional
Yeah.
job.
And here's the reason why, Leland. I want to make sure people understand why, because it's a transactional world we live in.
Mm.
Conventional business is transactional. You go in, you go in, have a transaction, you leave. When you're self-employed, I don't care what industry you're in, and I challenge anyone to convince me otherwise, because I'm actively seeking. I've yet to find an industry where someone is self-employed that this does not apply to. And that is that we are in relationship-based businesses.
Mm.
And the reason that's key is that, most people know the 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle, that says 80% of your income comes from 20% of your clients. Again, that's a very conventional business thought, because when you're self-employed, you can't afford for 80% of your income to come from 20% of your clients. That means you're wasting your time on 8 out of 10
Mm.
customers. And we don't have the time for that. We can't
Mm.
sustain ourselves. We need almost all our customers to be ideal customers, which is why I wrote my book Lingo. Like, let me teach people how to attract that. So I don't care what industry you're in. I mean, we are relationship based, whether your goal as a business is to get customers to come back to you, refer you, or simply not speak badly about your business because you can't afford that.
Mm.
You're in a relationship-based business, and you can almost take everything that you see in the world and flip it upside down. And I'll give
Mm.
a very clear example of that. Transactional businesses often offer discounts for new customers only. When you're self-employed and in a relationship-based business, there is no faster way to turn off your existing customers than to give a deal to new customers that your loyal customers don't get.
Mm.
It's completely ass backwards when it comes to being a self-employed business, which is
Mm.
why we need to do things different and almost always complete opposite of what we see around us.
And how do you think that creates do you think that creates a unique challenge to self-employed professionals where, hey, you know, big corporate transactional, we don't totally care about our customer. They're a money machine for us. We're going to do discounts because it's great for the bottom line. Does that create challenges for the self-employed professional who I'm with you. It's like my whole business is relationship focused. The whole idea of I need to find my target client because my time is valuable. And you're right. If I start charging new people half of what I charged my loyal people who've been around who really value my service, they're going to be actively turned off because it's such a relationship that they're going to feel slighted by that
Yeah.
in many ways.
Yeah, 100%. And so we have a good number of our students in our Self-Employed Business Institute that are in the financial industries. My work, and I speak at a number of financial conferences, and my work and my message really resonates with people in financial industries because, and I say this from stages, you all are in one of the most emotionally charged businesses there is. Like people,
Mm-hmm.
no one fights over, couples, families fight more over money than almost anything.
Mm-hmm.
And yet the marketing is completely lacking of emotion. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of interesting to me as an industry how it's such an emotional business, and yet it's presented very corporate, professional, cut and dry, non-emotional, right? So when that message gets through to financial folks, they really latch onto my message and my work, and I work with a lot of students like that. So to your point, yeah, it causes huge confusion because if we try to emulate more transaction-based business strategies, we're confused as to why they don't work for us. And
Mm-hmm.
in the Business Institute, for example, I teach a whole marketing system called Hug Marketing. And to kind of summarize the aspiration of that, Hug Marketing is instead of a marketing funnel, which looks like a triangle of a funnel, Hug Marketing system is a series of concentric circles, one circle inside of the other, so that we as marketers and business owners understand that there are people in the outermost circle, what I call lurkers, people that are watching you, seeing you, hearing you, but you don't know they're there. You don't know them by name, but you've gained their eyes and ears. And then it's your job to bring them closer, one circle at a time. The second to last circle is client acquisition. Great, right? A transactional business is thrilled. They acquired a client. But we go one step further, which is the hug, which is why it's called hug marketing. And in hug marketing, the goal is how do you build such deep relationships with people that if you had never met them before, if you met them in person, you would naturally want to give them a hug because the relationship is there. And in that process, we talk a lot about customer loyalty. And I literally teach and provide ideas on how to create customer loyalty programs that are complete opposite of the way the rest of the world does it. So whereas conventional businesses will give a discount for new customers only, I believe every relationship-based business should have a program where your existing customers get benefits that new customers do not. Okay. Again, completely. That's how you maintain loyalty. I mean, that's how you make people feel like they're part of a club and you don't necessarily market that as an attribute of your business. And often it's even more effective if it's something they find out once they become a customer. And you're like, hey, now that you're in the family, now that you're, part of us, I'd like to let you know about something that we do for you, our loyal customers that new customers don't get. Right. So it becomes that wow, impact that they feel like they're part of a club. And so that to me is, it is such a part of a relationship-based business that a conventional business, transactional business, they don't do it that way.
Well, and I love that, the concentric circles, because innately that's how whether we know it or not, that's how we live our life with our relationships. Like,
Correct.
my wife is my most inner circle,
Yep.
and then we have our family and our closest friends, and then our, work friends and our colleagues, and, the person from down, like your neighbor who, ideally your neighbor's closer probably, but we live in a weird world where we don't know our neighbors. So, but we live with people kind of in these rings, closer or further out. And you're right, the people in the most inner circle get a different piece of you that people the next circle out don't necessarily receive.
Yeah.
And from a marketing standpoint, I think about, I just lost the name of the book, but an author who talks about the fact that there's always another inner circle, and we're all longing to be in the next inner circle. So whether you are like, oh, I want to join the school's football team, and then you get on JV and you're like, well, now I want to be on varsity. Well, now I want to be a starter. Well, now I want to be a captain. And there's always this inner circle in every situation that we long to be included in because we're humans who are hardwired for connection.
Yeah.
And so to
And
do that for your
right.
clients is so powerful.
Yeah, because it's actually tapping into what has been proven to be the most most emotionally significant thing for humans
Mm,
is belonging,
yeah.
right? People need to have a place that they feel that they belong. And I actually was having a conversation with someone recently, and I said, I've yet to get my head around this because it's both inspiring as business owners and sad as a member of the human race. And that is that as businesses, we absolutely can make people feel like they belong
Mm,
through the power of our businesses, particularly relationship based businesses. Through the power of our businesses, we can make people feel seen, heard, and understood in a place that they belong. That's incredibly powerful. The sad thing is how fulfilling that is because of how much it's lacking for so many people. So many
mm,
people don't even get that at home. They don't get it from
mm,
their parents. They may not even get it from the relationship in, like that feeling they're really seeing. So it's a bit sad to me that as business owners, we can fulfill the human need for belonging. It's sad because people are often not getting it elsewhere. And yet, what an incredible role we play in people's lives if we recognize the power of that.
mm.
So I agree with you. I mean, there's always another circle. There's always because we're always looking for a place to belong. And it's why, in my photography business, over a 40-year span, I had many clients that I worked with for more than 30 years. And many of that good percentage of those I worked with every single year. Right. So I actually knew the depths in fact, we had a process in my photography business that if we didn't hear from a client over 3 years, on the third year, we would drop them a note and just check in with them and say, hey, it's okay if you've chosen to work with another photographer, but just want to let you know that you're missed. We wanted to make sure
Mm,
people recognize that we didn't see them.
mm.
And it almost always led to, oh my gosh, has it been 3 years? I had no idea that was how much time. And I knew actually that was likely to be the
Yeah.
response. It was like, oh my gosh, you're right. I can't believe my kids are 3 years older and I don't have any record of that. Let's do another session. So it actually was a significant marketing plan. And we
Mm,
knew that. But the messaging was much more heart centered than that. It was really about letting them know that, as I said, we acknowledge that we don't see you.
yeah.
Because I'll
We
tell you
listen
what,
to
in
you.
my
You
business,
matter.
yeah, that you matter. I mean, I'll give you an exact example. There was I think about 13 years of my photography business, I worked with the same frame maker. We're talking about handcrafted 22 karat gold leafed, beautiful frames that I would use for my portraits. And I worked with this frame maker for 13 years. And I in part built their business. I did a lot of business with them. I also introduced them to a lot of photographers. So their business grew significantly and the production got slower. Next thing it was taking longer and longer to get my frames. And I continuously complained about it to the point where I eventually dropped them as a vendor. I'm like,
Mm,
it's taking way too long to get frames. There are other options out there. I'm going to switch vendors. Some time went by and the owner of the company flew out to see me and let me know that they were dying to get my business back, that I was their number one photography client in the country.
mm,
And I said, well, the shame of it is I never felt that way. And I
mm,
said, how is it I'm your number one client as a photographer in the country and I didn't feel that way? That's the problem. So I
mm,
gave them another chance with a promise that they would improve their production, and they didn't. So they
mm.
lost my business permanently. So I actually gave them a second chance to acknowledge. So I think how ridiculous that is when
Yeah.
right, your number one customer and you're not taking care of them.
And they have no idea that they are anything more than just a transaction to you.
Correct. I had no idea that I was their number one photography client. And I had introduced them probably to a dozen of my photography friends, many of
Mm,
which I admired. So I assumed maybe they were doing even more business with this company. Had no idea that I was their number one client. And that to me is the shame of it. How can I be your number one client and not feel that way? So as
mm,
businesses, we need to, I've never actually said this before, but we want people to feel completely seen, heard, and understood. And we also want them to let them know that when they're unseen,
hmm. Yeah.
I mean, and again, often you'll gain their business back by letting them know, hey, you're missed. You used to be a part of our business and you're not now.
Yeah. I think that is a phenomenal framing because you think about people who, like, many times for your top client, you have your lists and you're like, all right, I'm going to call my top clients. I'm going to do a special event for them, which is awesome. Like you said, caring, letting them know you're important to me. But there's tons of other, like if we think about the 80-20 rule, are we going to the other 80% and saying, hey, we miss you. Hey,
Yeah.
it's been a long time. How are you doing? I know last time we talked about this. How was that? To basically say, you could be, A, if you're not my top, you could become my top, and B,
Mhm.
regardless, you matter. And like you said, you're going to retain a lot and win a lot of loyalty because we are so heart centric. I mean, in my business, I'm in finance. So like you said, it's totally heart related.
Yep.
Money is a weird thing. I tell my clients this because even though it's inanimate and it feels corporate, it feels transactional, it feels like stock market charts, it touches every area of your life.
Mhm.
It touches relationships, it touches your where you live, it touches quality, protection, self-worth. There's so many things that it, in many ways, it's dangerous because it can become a false god for someone. It can
Mhm.
become this idol in our lives, and it can also become a huge point of contention. Like you said, it's a huge area of divorce, is arguments over marriage or over money. And so to sit with people and speak to them in that language and to let them know you matter, this matters, I care about you, I see you. Hey, it's been a long time since we've talked about your finances, since you've come in, and this is a really important part of your life. How is that going for you? Really breaks through that threshold. And I think it surprises people, even though it makes sense. Like you said,
Mhm.
we wish people were getting belonging in every area of their life,
Yeah.
but they're not.
They're not.
And they think of business. Everyone thinks when they first think of business as transactional, as money, as a job, as this gray thing. And so when you treat it as it should be, which is we're in the people business. We care about hearts. We're impacting heartbeats, not clients, not customers. It almost surprises them.
Yeah.
They're like, that was
Like,
not an experience with a business or a financial planner or whoever it is that I was expecting, if
yeah.
that makes sense.
And, especially since you're in the money business, let me give you some insights, which I often say I have such a unique perspective. My life has just offered me an incredibly unique perspective in so many ways. And one of them is the fact I grew up lower middle class and I ended up, working with the most affluent families. And that dichotomy always existed. It's for many, many years of my career, I would be working with my clients and their 25,000 square foot mansions and their gorgeous, well appointed homes. And I'd leave there and have a family event I had to go to at my mom's house, which is a 1,400 square foot ranch with, um, brothers that were questionable. It was like a huge contrast,
Mm,
and one that I was always able to manage because I respectful of where I came from, but acknowledged where I was going. And so I was always respectful on both ends. And I think one of the things that afforded me a unique perspective, particularly as it pertains to money, is because I made this journey from lower middle class to working with affluent families. Here's one of my key observations that comes from that experience, but I think it applies to everyone, is
mm,
that money, how people feel about money, the energy of money, the buying decisions people make has everything to do with how they see themselves in the world.
yes.
And when you work, and again, that's true of all socioeconomic classes, it seems a bit highlighted, or maybe it was highlighted for me because I was studying the behavior and mindsets of an affluent clientele that I had to grow to understand because I didn't come from that. And I realized that their buying decisions are based on how they see themselves in the world. They
Hmm.
see themselves in the world as deserving the best. And I don't mean that it's not in a snobbish way. They have every right to deserve the best, but they see themselves in the world as deserving the best, wanting to maintain a certain quality, educating their children to the lifestyle they should expect for themselves. So they're inspiring their children to not be lazy rich kids, but to
Hmm.
aspire to greatness. So they're very strategic. So there's a reason why they choose a high end brand as opposed to a discount brand, right? It's
Hmm.
how they see themselves in the world. If you're someone who sees yourself in the world as having to skimp by, which, hey, if that's your truth, that's your truth. But that's how you see yourself in the world. It also can be pigeonholing, right? If that's
Hmm.
how you see yourself in the world, no matter how hard you work, you're not likely to put yourself in the world in a different way. This is one of the things I tell people that are aspiring, particularly service businesses. If you're aspiring to serve a higher end clientele, I just don't think your brain is capable of allowing you to shop at the dollar store while you're trying to market yourself as a high end, because you're confusing your perception of how you see yourself in the world. The
Mm,
moment you decide you want to pursue a higher end market, you have to see yourself in that world.
hmm
So that's literally how I trained myself at 23 years old, after having 3 years of a struggling photography business because I was in the wrong market. And I realized that I needed to work with an affluent clientele because they had values that were aligned with what I was offering. I gave myself 3 months to understand what made them tick. So for 3 months, every dollar I made, every dollar I could put on a credit card, everything I could scrape up, I was living their life. I went to high end stores. I bought the clothing that they would buy. I went to the restaurants that they would go to, and financially could have driven myself into the ground. And I was still making a little money here and there, and all that's the education I was investing in.
mm,
Because when I decided that was the right market for me, I had to be the right person for them. I
hmm
had to understand. So I had to change my perception, because prior to then, I saw myself in the world as a kid who had to become self-employed because there were no opportunities for me. That was how I perceived myself in the world. I had to change my perception of who I was in the world in order to change my position in the world.
mm.
And the coolest thing, and I rarely say this because it always runs the risk of sounding a little snobbish, but hey, I'm okay with that. One of my primary sources of education, and this whole story is in my book Lingo, is I grew up an hour and a half outside of New York City. So I went to Bergdorf Goodman, which is, if people aren't familiar with it, it's a one-of-a-kind store on Fifth Avenue. It's one of the most exclusive brands and stores you'll ever encounter, and they do everything right there. It's flawlessly high-end and beautiful.
Mm,
And I spent a lot of time in that store studying the behavior of the people that went there. I was looking for the emotional triggers. What makes people choose this? So I started going there as a kid, that from the moment I walked past the doorman, I'm thinking, oh man, they know I don't belong here. Like, I am completely misdressed. I look like a poor kid. The first time I went to Bergdorf, I literally started hearing tapping, and I'm like, what in the world is that tapping noise? And I realized that I literally had holes in the bottom of my shoes, and there was like a metal plate in this
hmm
embedded in the sole that was tapping on the marble. I never walked on marble. My parents' home had linoleum, right? And now I'm walking on linoleum marble, and it's tapping. The to me, the greatest representation of what I'm saying about how you perceive yourself in the world, you have to change that. My greatest example of that is I went from that kid that didn't belong to actually being an ongoing steady customer with a personal shopper at Bergdorf Goodman.
mm,
And again, I know that might sound a little uppity, but I don't care if it gets the point across. Like,
hmm
that's the journey it took me on, not belonging in there, right? And literally changing how I perceived I belonged in the world to actually being a consistent customer of the brand,
Well,
because of what I created and how it afforded me the ability to do so.
totally. And one of the things you're speaking to in changing the way you view yourself in the world has to do with what I think is kind of a plague to our society right now, which is victim mindset versus hero mindset. Are
Mm-hmm.
you a victim to the world you grew up in, the circumstances of your life? That, like you said, if that's your truth, that's your truth. But are you believing that that has to be your truth? Are you
Yeah.
believing that that has to be your story? I think it's easy, that it's a lesson I've been working on in my personal life for the last year or so, is like, these stories I'm telling myself, are they true? Or do they have to be true? Am I a victim to circumstance, or am I going to be the hero of my story, which says, regardless of my circumstances, I can change the way that I view myself in the world. I have agency to make a change, to learn and grow and evolve to the next level that I want to go to. But I think so many people get caught in, well, like, a perfect example is the affluent and the lower middle class. Like, many times the lower middle class believe, like, well, that's just my lot in this world. I'll never
Mm-hmm.
be there because this is where I come from. And they almost feel like if I go there, I'm leaving where I come from. And
Yeah.
that's going to be like, I'm going to lose relationships. I'm almost going to lose belonging and
There's
safety.
literally survivor's guilt
Yeah.
when people accelerate their wealth considerably or their success. There's literally often a survivor's guilt.
I see that
Hmm.
with other
Yeah.
self-employed professionals, because a lot of us come from grassroots, or we work our way up and we
Yeah.
achieve the success we've dreamed of, but then we feel like we left our kin. And it doesn't have to be that way. But again, it's these
No.
stories we tell ourselves. And if we can push through that and put on the hero mindset of our story and say, all right, I'm not a victim to this.
Yeah.
I can
I
build
can
the
give
life.
you I can give you a complete mind bend. Let's see if how your listeners feel about this. So if you can see what's possible for yourself, like AKA goals, but if you can see what's possible for yourself, no matter how big what you think you can see for yourself, you're going to experience incremental growth, which is good. You can incrementally get bigger, higher, more successful by seeing goals, obtaining goals. But if you really want to take a big leap forward, it's what you can't see. Right? There's a version, there are things that can happen in your life that you can't possibly see right now. And it's actually moving forward in a way of in just believing in that. But you can't believe in it because you don't know what it is. It's just something far bigger than you can possibly see. And it's a bit of a mind bend for people.
I know, I'm
because
wrapping my head around it.
Yeah, because we're so often, like I said, if you reach for goals and you achieve those goals, that's fantastic. That's incremental growth, right? You're seeing it, you're hitting it. You're seeing it, you're hitting it. The big leap is believing and trusting and not seeing. And that's a much harder thing to. Then it goes right back to perception. Like, you have to really work hard on what you see available to you. And one of in a more practical sense, one of the things. So in my Self-Employed Business Institute, we the first month is a 5-month cohort, and the first month is devoted to personal development, because as a cornerstone of all my work, I really believe you have to grow the person before you grow the business. And if you don't, it's why you end up with this hustle type of culture where, and I think every self-employed person can relate to this, that we just keep stuffing more in the sack, right? We just keep learning more skill sets, more business strategies, more social media. We keep stuffing in this sack, and then we wonder why we feel overwhelmed, and then we can't keep up. We feel like a hamster on the wheel, right? Because we haven't actually cracked the code, if you will. The code is growing yourself first. And I often refer to this as capacity. In order for your business to have greater capacity, more of anything's possible, you have to first work on the person. And what's laying on the top of most people's heads is what I call a deserving ceiling. We're holding ourselves back by what we have predetermined we deserve. And no matter how big and bold you want to think that you deserve, I deserve it all, I deserve to be a billionaire, you can say that to yourself, but do you believe it? And are you living it? And are you acting it? And do you really absorb that? So one of the first things we really look at is this idea of a deserving ceiling. How can we each get into stepping into believing we deserve more than we can possibly see, right? So we're not just raising the deserving ceiling, but how can we crack it open like it's an automatic ceiling on a football stadium? Like, how can we just crack it open so that it's unlimited? And then really, like I said, that your biggest leap is in believing and trusting in what you can't see right now.
I think that's phenomenal. I'm on board. I mean, well, and I think because, like you said, it's like opening the box. Like, we put everything in a box. We're finite humans who want to be able to understand everything. So we create these beliefs, we create these visions for ourselves, for others, and we're putting things in a box. And I think what you're saying is, like, I can imagine opening the box and putting myself in a bigger box. But then I'm just confined to that box.
Size box.
As opposed to saying, well, what if we just ripped the lid open on the box? And it's uncomfortable. Like, I'm feeling that of, like, there's some mystery involved. I can't understand what it'll be like. I can't fully fathom, but I know that I can believe that it's bigger than my biggest box that I can believe in. Is that kind of what you're saying?
I had an experience a couple months ago, actually, I guess several months ago now. And I have to say, like, I can get as woo-woo as anybody, but I'm also extremely practical minded. Like, I like facts and I like science to back up everything. Even, I talk about manifestation. You can look at it two different ways, right? One can look at manifestation as a woo-woo thing. I look at it I'll add a little woo woo, but I'll add a little science to it. The fact of the matter is to me, it's based on the science of brain priming. Like brain
Mm-hmm.
priming is you can only recognize what you already know,
Mm.
right? Which is why when someone tells you about something you've never heard before, and then suddenly you see it everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody tells you about a movie or a book or something you never heard of or a concept, and suddenly you see it everywhere. Well, that's because you can only recognize what you know. So once your brain has been primed to recognize that thing, you're more likely to see it. It's
Mm-hmm.
actually been there all along. Kids are great at this, by the way. I've seen many instances where children will start then saying, wow, I never heard of that before. Now I see it everywhere, right? So they're actually a really good example. So to me, it's the scientific version of manifestation. It's still powerful.
Mm-hmm.
You get to choose what you want to see and what you recognize. You put that in your brain and you're more likely to see it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it's still incredibly powerful. But several months ago, I had an experience where in a week's time, my front and rear windshield just blew out, right? Within a week. The front windshield got hit by your typical rock, but in a very and within a day, this small fracture on the windshield just shattered the whole windshield. And then I drive a convertible. The smallish window in the back of the convertible just shattered. And I just thought it was annoying, so I posted on social media like, what are the chances in a week? And by the way, when you blow out the rear windshield in a convertible, it means replacing the entire
Very
top.
top.
You
Yeah.
can't exactly. So now it's a much bigger project. And I just posted the annoyance of it on social media, and so many people wrote back to me and said, well, you know what that means? Like that literally means that there's something much bigger waiting for you. Like you're busting at the seams. And it became
Yeah.
a really interesting metaphor. And when it was said to me, I'm like, you know what? I can actually feel that. Like I felt like I'd gotten, like, to use your example, I felt like I got too big for the box. And by the
Mm.
way, it's a Mini Cooper, right? So it's small to begin
Literally
with.
too big for it.
Yeah, it literally it was when that was said to me repeatedly, I was like, you know what? I energetically feel like I've just busted out the parameters of my life. Several things
Mm.
had happened in my life right around that same time that literally led me to believe that that's what was going on. Like I energetically felt like I just blew up the deserving ceiling, and it may have
Mm.
been the sides of a vehicle, but it was the same essence.
Yeah.
And I don't know where it's going, and that's what I'm saying. It's like, but I can instinctively say, yeah, there's something on the cusp here. Maybe it'll be my next book I'm working on. Maybe it'll be this circumstance. I don't know what the circumstances will be,
Mm.
but I can energetically feel that a bigger, bolder version is awaiting me. And that's what I mean when I say about, you can have your goals, you can have your aspirations, go ahead, reach for them, hit them, awesome. But at the same time, really lean into believing that your biggest leap is one that you can't possibly see right now.
Mm.
I remember when my kids were little and I was talking to a coach I had at the time and talking about educating my kids and wondering, he gave me such great advice. Is, my kids were little, they're like maybe 5, 7 years old. And he said, by the time they come of age to go to college, there are going to be things in the world that don't even exist now, which are likely to be the trades they go into. And I'm thinking, that's very true. I mean,
Yeah.
right? We're looking at
Wild
AI
to think
now,
about.
right? I mean, there's an entire industry around AI that kids from 3 years ago you wouldn't even thought that would be a profession your children could go in, and now it is.
That is wild.
So
You're
your
right.
biggest,
It wasn't even it's been 10 years since I was in college, but it's like so much of the world today didn't even exist back then.
correct.
And
So
which
I'm
is
saying, so
crazy.
the biggest leaps are what you can't see.
So tell me, so you grew up, you're selling eggs, and then you become a photographer, and you're kind of figuring out self-employment basically on the fly. Like you are experiencing it, which is how you're learning. What made the shift to the last handful of years? I think you said the last 15 years, maybe, when it was with self-employed life, when you kind of jumped into, now I'm going to be a voice and an advocate for other self-employed professionals. From photographer to that feels like a leap, even though it was, you were self-employed, now you advocate for self-employed. So I can see that, but speak to that transition.
Yeah. So a few factors. One was that I had had a business coach for 7 years. So I hired my first business coach in 1999. So they're very peak years of my photography career. But I hired a business coach because, quite frankly, I'd been tired of doing it all on my own. I mean, not that I was on my own. I had a team of 4 or 5 people. But one of the things when you're self-employed, one of the key factors, which is why I try to build a community in our business institute, is that it's lonely. People
Mm,
complain all the time about it being lonely. And the Surgeon General of the United States has said loneliness is an epidemic in our country. Um, if you get to the root of the loneliness, doesn't mean you aren't surrounded with people. Often when you're self-employed, it's because you feel like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders. It's
mm,
your decisions. You have to own up your decisions. You may not have anybody to make those decisions for you. You may have the weight of a family. You may not be able to discuss some of your business decisions even with your partner because it may be unsettling, or you're focused on your family when you're home, right? I rarely spoke about the decisions I had to make in business when I was home, because that's when I was supposed to be present as a dad and a
mm,
husband. So that's where I think the root of the loneliness is, and which is why I think we as self-employed people really need to gather. So that's why I hired my first business coach in 1999. That was long before it was cool. And I worked with him for 7 years. And when he retired, that was my first thought that, gee, I want to do this for other people, what he did for me. So I went to coach training thinking it would just be, I thought it would just accent my ability to communicate with my photography clients, as well as maybe I'll coach a few people on the side. But man, once I got the bug of helping other people, I realized how much I really loved business. I love talking about it. I love the power of relationship building and I actually realized I actually enjoyed working on other people's businesses even more than my own. And it may have just been at that point, 25 years in, my business was stable, steady, and just sailing along. So it kind of maybe lost its juice of the excitement of building. But I love working on other people's businesses. So,
mm,
and then I started speaking in order to, and mainly initially in the photo industry, because that's the industry as I was known in. So I was speaking on stages, but that would get me clients. Then my coaching practice was growing. I'd say it's really, so I had a really solid coaching practice building for a number of years, but it's really in the last 4 years or so that I started using the word advocate more. And I did a lot of work around really getting clear on my values. And my number one value in the world is acceptance.
mm,
And I mean acceptance way beyond diversity, which I put at a very high priority when it comes to acceptance. But what really, and this is the ways in which we really get your non-negotiable values, like those life values that don't change throughout your life. For me, the number one value that's never changed throughout my life is this idea around acceptance, and particularly how the small person's place in the world.
mm,
I've always I was the shy kid. I've always stood up for children. I spent my life photographing children, kind of being their advocate, making sure they're seen, making sure I was the youngest of three boys. There's like no photographs of my childhood. My parents got bored. They didn't have the money. They're just, so I was very sensitive to the sequential children and how they may get
mm,
overlooked. They get hand-me-downs. They may not have as many photographs taken of them. So my number one value that I define as acceptance really is about fighting for the small person, the
mm,
person that's easily overlooked. I hate with a passion seeing somebody get overlooked.
mm,
And on the opposite side of that, another way that I really know that acceptance is a high value for me is that, I mean, this is going to sound, I don't know, it's going to sound like I don't really care, but applause brings me to tears every
mm,
time. I was in tears every one of my kids' sports games. I'm in tears watching American Idol. Like when I see people getting applause, because think about it, applause is a level of acceptance that is unbelievable. To have people applaud for you,
mm,
like you did a good job, let me applaud for you. You accomplished, let me applaud for you. Like it's incredibly emotionally powerful
mm,
applause. And it moves me tremendously because I like seeing a small person win. So it's in the last 4 years or so that I've really stepped up in my advocacy, and even, tried to, through the PPP loans, I worked really hard to make sure people knew they had access to those loans and how to get access to those loans. Because it was literally, and you may not know this, but it was the first time in US history, the words self-employed appeared in a piece of US legislation.
really?
First time in history that literally in the PPP loans was the first time self-employed business owners were called out as deserving of financial support from the government.
Mm,
Because in the past, it had always been small business.
mhm,
The problem is small business is up to 500 employees. The term small business doesn't represent 80% of the businesses that we deem small business.
mhm,
Um, in fact, during the recession, there was the financial aid was available to small businesses of more than 20 employees. I'll bet almost no one listening to your show has 20
Yeah,
employees,
I know.
right?
Yeah, you're
So
right.
we were left out.
Mm,
The one person, the businesses of one, the businesses of five, we've always been left out. And I knew this was going to be a problem during the PPP loans because I knew self-employed people wouldn't think that they were deserving of them because they were used to not being included.
mm,
That to me is the emotional shift that really took place about 4 years for me. So it's been a progression of transitioning out of photography into the coaching, but it's really leveraging everything I know as a self-employed business owner over 40 years, and also just my photographer's brain. I mean, by nature of being a photographer for 40 years, I see things that other people don't see.
hmm
I operate incredibly well in chaos because that's what photography is. It's a chaotic
especially
environment.
with kids.
Kids, and I also photograph on location, which I didn't
Mm,
mention, but so I'm subject to wind and sun and other outside circumstances. I didn't photograph in a studio. I photographed at their gorgeous homes and on the beach or on their yachts. And so I had a lot of it. So chaos, my brain thrives in chaos. I see things in pieces, but I can compose it whole. So that really helps me in coaching people on their businesses. My ideal client feels like they're all over the place, or they feel like they've been working really hard, but it hasn't come together yet.
mm,
If they find their way to me, that's what I'm best at. It's like I got you. Like I see what you can't see, and what in the ways that you feel like you're all over the place. I see how it can compose and come together beautifully. So to me, it's been a very natural transition, as odd as it might seem. But I've really been leveraging my 40-year experience, and also my photographer's brain to now help other people build their business.
Well, and something I appreciate and I would love for you to quickly share on is in your book you talk about, and you just referenced it, the difference between being self-employed and being an entrepreneur or a small
Yeah.
business. And we throw those around completely synonymously, or the world
Yeah.
does to an
Hmm.
extent. So can you quickly define what you would say is self-employment versus those things? Because I know that's an aside from what we were just talking about, but it is I think a powerful point and helpful for people to
Yeah.
hear.
I do too, because really the reason I bring that up is more on the energy behind the words. So there's an energy to each of those terms, and there's a logical reason. So let's start with small business, because there's a practical reason why we don't want to refer to ourselves as small business, because we actually want to get the government to and here's my dream. My dream is that someday there will be, right now we have the SBA, Small Business Administration. My dream is that there will be a department for the self-employed. And I really believe there will be someday in the government, and that the government recognize there's a difference in a small business of 500 employees and a business of one.
Mm,
So I really believe that eventually there will be a department for the self-employed. And that will be critical when it comes to financial aid help in times of catastrophes. And the pandemic we all just went through, that's not going to be our last one. And that's not going to be our last circumstances in which businesses are affected. So that's a really big deal. So the more we can call ourselves self-employed, the more we can train the society to respect us as being self-employed and not being swooped into this big bucket of small business.
mm,
Entrepreneur, I think, is one of the more confusing ones, because man, it's got a sexy energy. People like to call themselves an entrepreneur, but again, it's got an energy to it, and it may or may not match your intention. Entrepreneurship is often built to sell.
mm,
It also has a little bit more of a flavor of a grind and hustle atmosphere. It's how a lot of people interpret when you call yourself an entrepreneur. Um, it can have a little bit of I'm an entrepreneur, meaning, oh, so you're in between jobs, right? So
mm.
it has an energy to it that may or may not align to your own values. And it's really important that your values and why you built your business are aligned with how you're calling yourself. Freelancer, there's a lot of things I like about freelancers, because I like freedom. I like the idea of being independent. But again, it can often be interpreted as you have a talent, but you don't have a business model.
Mm,
So all things considered, I think we really should wear the label of being self-employed as a badge of honor, because we are letting people know that we're brave, we're crazy, we've built our own business. It lets people know when you're self-employed, there's a tax structure to it, and people, whether they know what the structure is, they know there's a tax structure to being self-employed. There's such a thing as called self-employed tax. Like, there's a structure to it. So I feel like you're letting the world know that you're brave and bold and you have a legitimate business.
mm.
And like I said, the more we call ourselves self-employed, the more we can carve out our safety even within something as big as the U.S. government.
Amen. Go ahead. You
We
should
need
just,
to use the term.
I know, that's
Yeah.
awesome. And a lot of that is why I chose self-employment success versus like
Yep.
entrepreneurial success or small business success.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, small business success has the same like ring to it, but self-employed, there is something different to that. Like you're saying, the energy
100%.
of like, there's a courage, there's, the navigating uncharted waters, there's so much like spirit behind it that.
I also think you're inviting support. Like, I think when somebody finds out you're
Mhm.
self-employed, they're like, cool, how can I help you?
Yeah,
Like, I will
totally.
buy, I mean, for the work I do, I do everything I can to buy local. I
Mhm.
moved from Miami to Jacksonville, Florida a year ago. And in Miami, because I was living in a high rise, I ordered all my dog supplies from Chewy, right? Because they're heavy, the dog food, just have it delivered. But the moment I moved to where I live now in the historic district of Jacksonville, it's got a small town center. I buy everything from the local pet store,
Mhm.
right? It's a family owned local, local store. So I always seek out more localized businesses. But when you tell people that you're self-employed, they are far more likely to say, that's cool. How can I support you?
Mhm.
Small business, it's the difference is when you say you're a small business, they see the word business. And when you say you're self-employed, they see the word self.
Mhm. That's a really good point.
And they're more likely to help the self than they are the business.
That is a fantastic point.
I've never said that before, by the
I
way.
know,
It
I'm
just
like, put
occurred to
that in
me.
your book. That's
Exactly.
awesome.
Yeah.
So what surprised you the most about your whole journey of self-employment?
Yeah. Without a doubt that it's like personal development on steroids.
Mm.
Like, I mean, we go into business because we think we're building a business, but honestly, what has surprised me the most is that everything I am as a human is because of my experience being self-employed. And like I said, it's like steroids because you encounter more at a faster pace than your average traditionally employed person or somebody sitting on the couch. Like, we're hitting it all like at a rapid your your emotions are being challenged, your patience are being challenged,
Mm.
everything's being challenged at a faster rate. So what has surprised me is I thought I was going into business to make a few bucks, and what I realized is it's become my entire source of growth as a person.
Yeah. I I mean, that is also one of the biggest key benefits I found of self-employment. They say, I mean, this is not, I didn't make up this analogy, but diamonds are created out of intense pressure. Like
Hmm.
you take
Yeah,
earth and you put massive pressure on it and it refines itself into a diamond. And it's like we're
that's a good
putting
point.
ourselves into a pressure cooker where all of our insecurities are revealed, all of our weaknesses are revealed,
Yep.
our strengths are revealed, and it just puts you under a magnifying glass of your true self. You can't hide. For whatever reason, it just exposes, and then you're forced to either choose growth and choose like creativity and newness and how do I evolve as a human, or you burn out and you go back to the comfortable job where you don't have to be in a pressure cooker anymore, where
Hmm.
someone else is responsible
Absolutely.
and you just do your thing and then go home.
Absolutely.
What was the low point for you?
Mhm. Yeah, I think going back to I alluded to when my photography business was failing in my hometown, a low point and yet an incredibly strong pivotal point, which they often go hand in hand, was here I had this business that I was building as a portrait photographer, intending it to be high end, and it was high end for that community. Although nothing compared to the business I ended up building, but for my hometown, this lower middle class area, it felt high end,
Mm.
and it just wasn't working. And I had a specific conversation with somebody who literally said to me, she goes, great pitch, but I can't afford it. It was just, and the low point was realizing, oh my God, I'm barking up the wrong tree.
Mm.
And what do I do with that? And that, to me, the pivotal lesson of that is that I had to make a choice then that a lot of businesses face all the time is, do you change everything about who you are and what you value to match the market? Or do you believe, as I do, is that somewhere out there, there's a market for everybody
Mm.
and it's your job to find that market? Right. And a quote I use often in my keynotes is it's not your job to prove your value to anyone. It is your job to find the people who already value what you do.
Mm.
So it shifted my thinking from constantly trying to sell people on the value of what I did, trying to convince people to spend money they didn't have. That low moment switched my mind to thinking there's got to be a market of people out there that already value what I do. And that's how I determined they were affluent, because they had discretionary income. And what I realized, how easy, incredibly easy it was to make money, to work with people who already valued what I did. They valued having
Mm,
things to hand down to them. I didn't have to convince. The value was already there. So that low point was a moment where I mean, again, I was only 23 years old. That may sound really young, but I was married at 20. So I was already married for 3 years. I had an apartment, I had expenses, and it set me back in my chair to think, what do I do? I'm literally barking up the wrong tree. I
mm,
don't belong here. Do I change everything about myself, or do I believe there's a market out there for me? And I obviously chose the latter route, but low moment, very low moment, because I had a business that was, on the brink of financially putting me under.
man. So this is a podcast about success, but if I'm sure you know this, having worked with so many self-employed professionals, if you pull anybody on the street and say, how do you define success? You're going to get a different answer from every person. That word
Mhm.
means different things to different people. So for you, how would you define success, and how will you know if or when you have achieved it?
Mhm. So it has part into something I say to my kids, that they'll know I lived the life that I wanted to if they have no idea where to bury me.
That's awesome.
Literally, I move pretty frequently, and I move on a whim. So success to me means having built the lifestyle that I have the ability to do that. Now, I understand when you have children. I've raised 3 kids, and there's some restrictions based on the phase of life you're at. But from the moment my kids went off to college, I've been moving pretty consistently from New York City to Miami Beach to downtown Miami to now Jacksonville. And I don't know what's next, but I know this is not a permanent stay
Mm,
for me. Um, but to me, that's what success looks like. Success looks like having built the financial resources, having built the freedom
mm.
to actually explore the world, and even in that, if that means move uh, to the way you want to. It's not about, like I said, I drive a Mini Cooper. I mean, I'm not out to have the fastest, sexiest car. It's definitely not. Success does not look necessarily like material goods to me.
Mm.
I mean, I like nice things. I'm obsessed with really expensive sneakers. I will admit that. So it's not that it doesn't exist, but what success really means to me is the freedom of choice.
Mm. I love that. Well, Jeffrey, thank you so much for taking the time and being on the Self Employment Success podcast. We'll have to have you back at some point because you're just a wealth of knowledge and wisdom. And we
Happy to
just
do it.
really appreciate your time.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.